Thank you, Claire, for that wonderful introduction, and good morning, everyone. As Claire said, my name's Marlon Motlop. I'm a 2022 Nuffield Scholar. Before I go any further, I'd just love to make some acknowledgements to start the day off. First, by acknowledging my sponsor, Woolworths. I wanted to acknowledge Nuffield International, Nuffield Australia, in particular Jody and the board for their support over my Nuffield journey. I need to make mention and acknowledge my family, in particular my lovely wife. Back when I travelled, I got married, and 5 days after I proceeded to go on my honeymoon, which existed of 8 countries and a Nuffield Scholarship. So, yeah, you'll be happy to know I'm still married, which is great. I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging elders within the community, and also extend that respect to any other First Nations people that are in the room from other parts of the world, and also acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal countries that I travelled to on my journeys around Australia here. In terms of who I am, so yeah, as I said, my name's Marlon Motlop. I'm a Darwin boy at heart. I'm a saltwater boy from the Northern Territory, Northern Australia. I'm a Larrakia Gulumidjan man. They're my people, the traditional owners of the Darwin area, and I have ties through Quinarakan country, through the Paperbuck, Finnis River Plains, just outside of Darwin. My grandfather is a Torres Strait Island man, was born on Thursday Island, but our Motlop name comes from a place called Darnley Island up in far north Queensland. Early life for me existed around, I grew up and I was born into an AFL football family. But if I wasn't at school, if I wasn't at football, I was in our waterways hunting, fishing and foraging for Australian native produce. But back then we didn't see it as a native produce, we just saw it as food. My journey into an introduction into the native food industry didn't happen until later in life, where I was fortunate enough to become the farm manager and director at the Native Co, which is a First Nations Australian native food business here in South Australia, housing and growing Australian native produce in a controlled environment to alleviate the challenges of seasonality with wild harvesting and the challenges within the native food industry with wild harvesting. So I want to talk about my why a little bit, but I'll come back to that at the end because that's a really a key value in terms of, you know, one of the motivators and why I chose to do a Nuffield Scholarship and why I chose to apply. But first I want to take you on a journey through my travel through my Nuffield Scholarship, which started at the Contemporary Scholars Conference in Vancouver, onto the triennial tour in New Zealand, and then on my Global Focus program through Brazil, Belgium, America, Texas, England, and then individual travel through to Singapore, Dubai, and an extensive period throughout remote Australia through Aboriginal communities, sitting down, listening and talking with Aboriginal traditional owner groups. In terms of Aboriginal Australia and in terms of what kind of underpins my study and Australian native foods, hands up if anyone's familiar with this map. Beautiful. That's the first time I've seen that many hands in a room. It's amazing. So this map is essentially a representation of Aboriginal Australia and all of our language groups, or what we refer to as countries, and in that is a diverse group of many nations which hold our own specific food and song, dance and customs and traditions as well. And so think of it as Europe and the amount of countries and different languages over in Europe and the continent of Europe. Aboriginal Australia is essentially made up in the same concept and the same structure. So the case studies throughout my travel existed. I researched a number of different native foods, and I stumbled and came down to, I think, you know, five of these native foods, which are the damiumba, which is the kakadu plum, the warrigal, which is the native spinach, the Malema speargrass, which is a giant speargrass prevalent throughout the Northern Territory and northern parts of Australia and Western Australia, and even stumbled across the musqueam bannock, which is a flatbread made from native seed in Northern America. So the kakadu plum, throughout my research, I found that the kakadu plum has been labelled a superfood over the last decade. It's 100 times more vitamin C than an orange, as high as 3,000 milligrams per 100 grams of fruit, which is pretty amazing. It's rich in antioxidants, and from a cultural standpoint and cultural practice point of view, in parts of the Northern Territory, it's only harvested and processed by females and women within the community. It got its name as a superfood over the last decade, and because it's been so highly sought after throughout, both from an international and national standpoint, resulting in the National Aboriginal Australia Kakadu Plum Alliance Consortium, which is designed to control, monitor and regulate the sustainable harvesting and processing of a Kakadu plum. The Warrigal green, so the Warrigal is an interesting one, it's one of my favourite. The Warrigal is a name which represents, which translates to wild dog over in the eastern parts of Australia. If you take a Warrigal seed and look at it, it forms the shape of the seed pod forms the shape of a baby pup or a wild dog, and the local Aboriginal people and local Aboriginal tribes referred to it as Warrigal or wild dog. But it has a synonymous representation with the Australian story. It was used to fight scurvy in the settlers' camps in the early 1700s and late 1700s, and it's high in vitamin A, C and folate. The male emma giant speargrass, I grew up with this, pulling it out of my skin, running through the speargrass back home in Darwin, but this is quite prevalent throughout Northern Australia and Western Australia as well. It's harvested for its seed pod. Our people back home used it prior to colonisation and settlement. We used it to ground up and form a flour and make damper, of what we know for all the campers out there. As I said, harvested for bread. The seeds are high in complex carbohydrates, and in case of an emergency out in the bush, if you're ever stuck, it's high in glucose. And the stem of it, after a rainy season, or what we call the dullo season, which is a big monsoonal season, it holds and stores a lot of water. So in case of an emergency, if you're stuck, just look for that. There's a number of different barriers throughout the Australian native food industry that kind of prohibit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from getting a foot in the door in many ways. And throughout my research, they've kind of helped me form a number of recommendations. These are not all of the recommendations. In the essence of time, I've got 2 minutes left, so I'll only pick the most important 5 if they are the most important. But the first one is strengthen IP and traditional knowledge protection. The second one is build consumer trust through authentic branding. Greater investment into research and development for First Nations businesses. Secure sustainable supply chains through capability building. And increase capital investment into First Nations agribusiness as well. And then we get back to my why. As a young saltwater boy from the Northern Territory, it was quite a challenge for me to find my motivating factors in terms of why I wanted to apply for a Nuffield Scholarship, apart from the opportunity being so great and the opportunity being such a privilege. But in terms of my why, it's about, because I believe that First Nations voices and farmers deserve, belong and need to be represented within the agricultural and food industry. As hard as it was for me to partake in, and the amount of times that I questioned whether this was for me or not, the truth is it's never been about me. It's been about the advancement of First Nations knowledge systems and embedding that within farming and agriculture within Australia. And more so, it's about having more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nuffield scholars in the future. And why Australian native foods? There's over 60,000 years of farming and agricultural occupation embedded into the DNA of this country. The role that native foods provides and serves from a cultural standpoint acts as a pillar for the law and the land within this country for our people. And for me, most importantly, it acts as a vehicle for connectivity between cultures and people. Championing Australian native foods is just as much about the education and the conversation than it is about absorbing it, eating it and sharing it. And I want to leave you with a photo. So this is myself and fellow Nuffield scholar Tom Hook from East Lowden Farms. He's a merino wool farmer in New South Wales. And that's us after sharing a nice beer, sitting in the fresh waterways in the traditional lands down in the southern part of Brazil in a place called Mato Grosso do Sul, after sharing stories around how we can better and advance Aboriginal voices within farming back home here in Australia. So once again, my name's Marlon Motlop. Thank you for your time and thank you for everyone. I'm keen to get to know everyone and connect with fellow scholars and the fellow Nuffield community today. Thank you.